Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've all had an enjoyable day. It's been an enlightening start to the year, as always, at the Oxford Farming Conference. There's been some fascinating presentations, so we hope to follow that now. As Technical Director at Map-of-Ag, I've been working really closely with the sustainability team and our customers in order to develop approaches to finding ways of reducing greenhouse gas emissions as part of a wider sustainability strategy. My background has been sort of looking at emissions and agricultural sustainability for close to 20 years, and I've been really close to the detail around emissions measurement and monitoring, both from a national inventory perspective. As part of in my previous employment, I worked as part of the team delivering the national inventory on behalf of DEFRA and BEIS, and I've taken a lot of that learning and understanding and the mistakes that we've made over the course of that period and trying to translate that into something that is ultimately going to be useful for farmers. And that's what I really want to focus on just now and sort of give a little bit of a context to, I suppose, how do we make the process of emissions measurement and monitoring useful for the supply chain, but also for farmers who are going through that process. Firstly, I just want to have a very quick recap on some of the drivers that we have for measurement and monitoring, sort of MRV systems for our agricultural systems. And obviously we have the international driver. The thing that underpins a lot of what we do is international targets set by UNFCCC and things like the COP process, so the Conference of Parties, which is held every year in terms of the climate negotiations. And I suppose a lot of what we see now in what we're trying to implement on the ground really stems from what happened in 2015 at the Paris COP and the agreement that stemmed from that, which was looking to try and keep climate change within 1.5 degrees of pre-industrial levels. Now, unfortunately, I think we've already passed that stage. So it only means that we've got to really focus harder on how we implement change across society, but in what's within our control is the farm area, and that's what we're going to focus on today. How that sort of international standards flows down, we've obviously got national standards. The UK was the first country to set legally binding carbon reduction targets in 2008, and subsequently that was updated in 2019 to account for the net zero target, which we are now working towards. And then what flows from that is things like the corporate standards that we set. So we see up here we've got science-based target initiatives, GHG protocol, and I've actually included the Competitions and Markets Authority because that's also now reviewing a lot of what ambition and targets have been set by companies. So it's getting a lot more scrutiny. There's more detail in terms of how these things should be done coming online. So we need to really be focused on the things that are driving emissions and what we do about it to achieve emissions reductions over time. We then look at industry, and I'm really passionate about how we as an industry present ourselves. How do we tell the positive stories with strong evidence for how we are acting in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from our farming systems? I think there's more we can do in that particular area as an industry, and I think we need to get better to present proper, real evidence, data-led approaches to the emissions reduction strategy. And then finally, but not least, and I would suggest this might be the biggest catalyst of all, is the financial services sector. So the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. It's a catchy title, I know. So TCFD, that is really there in order to effectively account for every pound and dollar and euro of lending which enters the market globally. So every pound that's lent into businesses through the supply chain, from farms through to retailers, now needs to be accounted for in terms of its greenhouse gas emissions impact. That is going to be a serious driver, and the full extent of that task force work has not really come online yet, but it will do over the course of the next couple of years, I'm sure of it. So, going back to farms. I've been involved with emissions measurement and monitoring on farms for, as I say, the best part of 15 years. I started with inventory and then we distilled that down onto farm scale. And I've been through the process of gathering lots of information from farmers about how do we measure greenhouse gas emissions. But the one thing that I really want to try and get to the point of is how we make it useful for farmers. How do we actually implement change as a result of doing all this measurement and monitoring? How do we understand and communicate that baseline position? realistically, and I think it's still the case now, farmers don't necessarily know and understand everything about enteric fermentation, nitrous oxide emissions, and all of the things that underpin those emissions. But what they do understand is their farm system. So we need to be able to translate the farm system into what that means for their emissions baseline and what they do as a result of it. And importantly, how do we communicate the opportunity level for emissions reductions? We have biological processes in farming, which means that getting to zero is incredibly difficult from an emissions perspective. We've got enteric fermentation, we've got nitrous oxide from nitrification, denitrification processes. It's not all going to disappear. We are reliant on those systems. So where's the theoretical minimum? Where's the logical place that we can get to, and what's within our control today? So I kind of feel this is where we're at. The baselining position is still quite a dominant component of where we're trying to get to. About 15 years ago, it was 10 years ago, sorry, I started a project where we baselined 1,500 farms in Scotland for their emissions. And I was very excited about this project. It was a case of getting out onto farm, gathering lots of information, putting it through a greenhouse gas emissions assessment. I refer to them as greenhouse gas emissions assessment, by the way, rather than carbon audits. I absolutely hate the term carbon audits because it's not carbon and it shouldn't be seen as an audit. It should be seen as a useful process to go through. But that was a really instrumental bit of learning for me because we gathered all this information. We spent quite a lot of government money and we didn't really get to the point where I wanted to because we'd been through the process of throwing a lot of information at a carbon audit tool and we'd seen the results, but actually what was in that didn't tell me the results. It didn't tell me what actually we do on farm to reduce emissions. And it took me a bit of time, but I started interrogating all of the input data that went into the carbon audit tools. And we managed to then extract some useful information from that because we were able to determine some information around things like herd fertility, around nitrogen use efficiency, nutrient use efficiency, and then we started to piece together what people actually do about their emissions, not just what the output of the carbon calculator was. But there was some difficulty with the activity data that had gone into it because it was all more or less plucked from the heads of farmers and not necessarily done in such a consistent way. So that was something that we really wanted to improve on. And when I joined Map of Ag back in 2020, that was my first objective. How do we improve activity data to feed into tools? Whichever tool you want to use, there's a real focus around the tool. We need to start thinking about the activity data that goes into those tools and use whatever one you like, but just make sure what goes into it is really good and useful, accurate information. So the challenges that we face in all systems really is that an emissions calculation is always going to require a degree of contextualization. Every farm's different. If you're looking at emissions within a 12-month period of time, it's difficult sometimes to unpick what that means because we're working with multi-annual production systems. If you think about a beef production system, an animal that is sold today might have been born 24 months ago or longer in some instances. So sometimes when you're looking specifically at a 12-month window of time, it doesn't give you the whole story. So again, this is why we need to have much better activity data to inform that process. I've commented on biological systems already. Weather is the other one. We're at the mercy of the weather, and that will always influence what happens within any given 12-month period. We need to take a more of a systems-based approach to understand what the longer-term impact of our actions are, rather than just looking at 12-month windows at a time, which are going to have fluctuating weather patterns. Poor data I've commented on. And just remember that what comes out of a greenhouse gas emissions assessment is only an output. It's like a balance sheet. We've got to really figure out what actually influences that balance sheet, what goes into that system. And just to labour the point on the biological processes, I like to think about the whole process of an emissions calculation around being resource efficiency driven. So we effectively, within our farming systems, we put a nutrition into the system, whether it be feed or fertiliser, if we do. And then we feed them into the engine rooms of the system, so the livestock and the soils. And how efficiently we use those engines of the system will determine how much nutrition we produce as an output and what the overall emissions look like as a result of it. So the priority actions, based on what I've already talked about in terms of the activity data that feed things, really understanding things like fertility and longevity of our livestock. Do we have enough information to understand the true understanding of the lifetime productivity of animals. Animal health is a key component to that. Fertility is a key component. And having robust animals that are going to last longer in the system. Nutrient use efficiency is an element which applies across all systems. So protein and nitrogen utilization, really important in terms of understanding what the impacts are on emissions. Forage quality and reducing concentrate feed rate is a big influencing factor. And then obviously soil health. All of those components interact with one another. They don't stand in isolation. There are things that interact between each of those components. And then there's things about the decisions we make about the inputs that we do use if we choose to on farm. So low emissions feed and fertilizer. There are opportunities, and there's far, far more understanding now of what we can do to procure lower emissions feedstuffs and lower emissions fertilizer products. And that's where I sort of bring in this concept of the theoretical minimum. It's that place at which things are operating at optimum efficiency within that farm system. So it offers an understanding of where the opportunity for emissions reductions lies, where the external factors may have an impact, plus or minus a bit, but to all intents and purposes, you've controlled your variables as much as possible. And it helps set a bit of context, and it's really useful when engaging with groups of farmers. They say, you know, you might be sitting at 22 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of beef output today. We're not expecting you to get to zero in 3 years' time. Here's what your opportunity levels are. You're able to communicate whether actually they're operating at pretty near to optimum efficiency already, so you can actually tell the positive story about what they're doing. It's a really useful concept to help engage farmers with this, because it becomes all of a sudden a little bit less daunting. And just as a very brief example of the kinds of things that we can do with data, one of the first things that we did when we were working with Morrisons was say, if we're going to do this properly for your beef supply chain, we're going to have to understand, we're not going to have to access the British Cattle Movement Service data. Because the BCMS data tells us what's on farm every day of the year, what age it is, and what animals are born, and all of this lifetime information that we need to build a really high resolution picture of the emissions that are occurring. But not just the emissions, that lifeline plot there on the left-hand side is telling me how many calves have been born, how many animals have died on farm, how long they've spent on farm. It tells me about the calving block that's occurred. It tells me so much about the system without even having a conversation with the farmer. I can go to the farmer and start to have an engaging conversation based just exclusively on that. And especially when you start to couple it together with that other graph there, which is all the kill data. Now, without even asking the farmer a question, I've got a really good understanding of the beef production system. We've started to look at other data sources that are really useful here. So feed deliveries. We've got excellent sort of, networks now within the feed supply sort of infrastructure, so we're able to extract data directly from feed companies as well. It's not designed to be really intrusive. It's actually designed to reduce the administrative burden on farmers, but ultimately really improve the accuracy of the calculations that are done and help to understand what the emissions reduction profile over time looks like. Again, we've got arable systems that we're working closely with. I mean, the key component in arable systems is how much are we looking at nitrogen utilization, and also things like fuel use. But nitrogen utilization and working on sort of things like nitrogen mass balance is a really important here in terms of understanding nitrogen use efficiency. And then, very quickly, just to summarize, the theoretical minimum component or concept is really useful in terms of communicating where the opportunity levels are, and we've got to remember that the emissions calculation is just a calculated output. It's not the thing that provides all the answers. It's not the thing that then says this is what you do about it. We've got to really start to understand all of that underpinning data that is going to help drive down that emissions profile. Consider the farmer experience. I love speaking to farmers about this stuff. They're really engaged with it. We've got to get it down to the sort of level where we're really understanding their farm systems so that we can make bespoke recommendations on farm and really help them improve their overall farm efficiency as well. There are lots and lots of opportunities to improve the way in which we do greenhouse gas emissions calculations to the benefit of the farm and to the wider industry. And I think we've got really exciting opportunities to do that through the use of better data. I'm going to pass over to Sophie, who's going to talk through a bit more detail on what we're doing at Morrisons.
Yes, so great to be here. So thank you very much indeed to Mapavag for the invitation. And for those of you who haven't met before, my name's Sophie Throop. I work for Technical Sustainability Director for the Mighty Food Group, which as described is the manufacturing business for Morrisons. But I joined Morrisons 7 years ago to look after agriculture. I've been involved in agriculture sort of really all my life, really worked with vets for a very long time, for about 10 years before joining Morrisons. We're also farmers at home, so dairy and egg farmers. So I always get very direct feedback whether I want it or not. So just a bit about Morrisons and obviously thinking about this practical minimum of that path to net zero. So, you know, just a little bit as well, just about the manufacturing business. We have got 19 sites across the UK, which I think is something that not everybody necessarily realises, which include 3 abattoirs and a big meat packing business. Morrisons also, you know, very proud links to British farming and how we work with British farmers all together. But also we are a very strong meat business. You know, we do overtrade in meat against our category, and something we're very proud to do so. Customers come to us, and one of the reasons they shop at Morrisons is because we're good at meat. You know, we have that connection and we do some good meat quality. But that brings with it also responsibilities. You know, we know, and we've all in the room and we're part of the industry, we know particularly a few years ago the huge attention that red meat in particular is getting in relation to climate change. And actually we needed to do something about it and wonder what that should be. And we were telling that and informed by that from what only our customers said, but also others as well. But our customers, you know, they of course, and this is our most recent survey that we did we do them every year. They get published every year in about sort of springtime in 2024. Yes, of course, customers are very mindful about selling affordable food, and we can't get away from that. You know, no matter how much we might want to, we have to be conscious that consumers, you know, have a pocket to worry about and a household budget to sort of to get behind. But also, of course, they want safe food, but they do want to support British farmers and understand how, you know, good, responsible retailers and manufacturers can do their worrying for them, essentially, ensuring animal welfare, but also all those other elements of climate change. We were certainly seeing more customers asking about, and when you do age profiles as well, as you can maybe imagine, the younger generation customer is even more interested and motivated by discussions and thinking about climate than perhaps an older customer is. Not always, but often. We also, of course, and Hugh referred to these before, have overall sort of like corporate targets and corporate sort of goals that we need to get to. Hugh referred to the TCFD, so Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and the banking sectors as well, that, you know, really talking about green finance, our investor community. We're, of course, not listed on the stock exchange at the moment. We do have investors by being within private equity, and they're all very conscious about where that money is being and how that money is being invested. And so, you know, corporate targets and thinking about that pathway to net zero are really important. And so as Morrisons business overall, which includes manufacturing, we have a huge footprint in scope 3 emissions, scope 1 and 2 being, of course, what you can control much more yourselves, so what is in your direct control. Scope 3 being basically everything you buy in and a little bit of what happens to the product when you send it back through to the customer. That's 97% of our emissions footprint. And all of that, you know, it's hard enough trying to sort of think about our own sort of fridges and, you know, in manufacturing, whether lines are on or off and what sort of lights we using, whether we don't have leaks in fridges, you know, whatever it might be. But it's you know, huge, a massive topic with scope 3 emissions. And obviously we therefore have science-based targets initiatives to meet. So Morrisons corporate one is to meet scope 3 emissions reduction by 30% by 2030. Other companies go further, but that's the right one that we did for us when we sort of set those that emissions sort of pathway with SBTi back in 2019 with the Carbon Trust. So we have a lot of corporate ambitions to make. We've got our customers who are motivating us as well. And so that wraps into how we think about and how we deliver sustainable agriculture. And it is important, as Hugh describes, and I'll come on to specifically about net zero in a moment, but it is important to do this as a holistic picture. You know, and farmers, as well as everybody else, get very frustrated if we only talk about carbon. This is much more about like a rounded picture about understanding how nature, animal welfare, social welfare, but also financial resilience really hang together in an overall sustainable path to the future and high quality British farm food from farms we know and trust. You know, I think I heard it at the conference today, but one of my favourite sayings is you can't be in the green if you're in the red. And that is so true. And we know, particularly now as much as any time as well, farmers have huge amounts of pressures on their budgets. And we have to be very mindful about, you know, anything that we're sort of going to set with and targets and ambitions that we have, how are we going to support and work with our farmers to be able to support them to get nearer to some of those and really what's in it for them. So when we're talking about sustainable agriculture and net zero in particular, we sort of set what we call our ambitious ambition to get to net zero by 2030. And with our direct supplied base, that is an incredibly ambitious ambition, we recognise. But it's about setting a sense of direction about where you want to go and understanding, you know, to take the JCB analogy you heard before, you know, let's just get on and do it. So let's really sort of crack on and not wait for perfect to come along, but also do some with the right partners involved, which is what I'll come on to, and obviously why we're here with Map of Ag, you know, the right partners that can really involve us and support us and our farmers that we work with in getting there practically. Reducing emissions is, of course, often, but not always, but often about also reducing costs. And so that's when that sort of financial balance is really important, and thinking about how our farms can become efficient for their own profitability. We've also said for a long time, which also fits in really nicely to Hugh's concept and talking about that theoretical minimum, in my old sort of like keep it simple sort of piece of thinking about net zero like a balance scale, we always say the emissions is really how low can you go, whereas sequestration is a bit how high can you grow. It gets a bit corny, but how low can you go in terms of taking those emissions footprint really far down, and that is really the theoretical minimum that is right for that farm. To be able to get there in terms of an approach, it is about the data. It's about understanding what that data is, making it accessible. And one of the reasons we wanted to work with Hugh is that a couple of pieces really. One, if we, as any sort of like corporate business, are going to make any sort of statement about what we're doing, Hugh described before the Competition and Markets Authority, we have to be really sure that it's right. We can't just sort of greenwash and put out big, really nice, fabulous statements without actually having some data to back them up. And so that granular detail and that attention to detail is absolutely vital. And you only get that by concentrating fully on what is actually happening. What is actually happening as well, and capturing that primary data also enables you to motivate better sort of actual change. If we only ever rest on theoretical examples, we'll never motivate and think about how we can bring farmers with us on a journey. And it's also really about sort of understanding how we can get that farmer to really understand their farm footprint. There is no one model. There is no one sort of way of functioning. Of course there isn't. Farms are so very different. And so it's understanding, well, actually, what is the data? What can we understand from that data? And then what can we start to pull together? And what tools can we develop as easy as possible? Another challenge to Hugh and the team was exactly that. How do we make sure we aren't asking farmers to sit behind, you know, lots of desks and fill in loads of forms and, you know, sort of have a bit of element of subjectivity. You know, the facts when we're looking particularly in meat, as we were talking about, and thinking about meat's response to the net zero and climate challenge, you know, let's make it as simple as possible by understanding we can access that BCMS data. Obviously for us, having our own abattoirs and our own sort of like kill data readily accessible, how can those two elements go together? And I think Hugh was describing that's about 80% of the farm footprint for beef is from those two data sources alone, which is hugely valuable and also very robust. But what we were able, and we've learned so much along the way of doing this journey too. So what we first sort of did, I had a very naive thought, which I should have really known better, was to sort of say, well, that's great. We'll bring all this data together and we'll sort of benchmark it. And we worked with Harper Adams, who we do a lot of work with as well, and some fantastic vets, Jonathan Statham and others at Raft, and Map of Ag to say, right, okay, what could a benchmark be? How can we red, amber, green to give farmers like, just pop out a fabulous idea for an action plan, on we go for the next farm, and we can just scale it. Well, of course, that's a bit crazy, really. You just sort of like, you know, feed all the data in and have a pop out of an answer. It's not very engaging for the farmers, and we recognise that if you're going to do any sort of this change in the support, was so much more we needed to do to bring farmers with us and to talk with them, but also not just the farmers involved with, our own teams, our own livestock teams, our own livestock buyers. You know, they're the key sort of like boots on the ground, our literal boots on the ground. If they don't understand what it is that we're going after, and if they don't really get why we're doing it, why are the farmers going to bother as well? So we really had to do a huge amount of knowledge transfer, knowledge support, and working out how we made that difference. And so we've done a lot of work too. That's one of the reasons we sort of set up the School of Sustainable Food and Farming at Harper Adams University alongside the NFU and McDonald's to try and think, well, how do we bring together a pool of support, but also how do we use Map of Ag and the team of vets that they have and other vets that we work with too through Raft and others to get and have those actual consultations with farmers. As Hugh sort of said, farmers are really engaged if you spend time in talking with them and also try and demystify some of the worries that they naturally will have as well about what does this mean? Are you going to drop me because I'm not going to meet your footprint? Well, no, we're not. We're going to try and understand, you know, what is in your data set and what is the practical things, as Hugh described, for you to go after that's going to make a difference for you on your farm, both economically, but also from an emissions perspective as well. We also do as much as we can to join those farms together, so they're not just sort of listening on a one-to-one basis, but they're also learning and talking with each other. So of course the importance of farm walks and farm demonstration events, but being part of a sustainable farm network through the School of Sustainable Food and Farming is incredibly important as well. And the more, and I'm very passionate about this, we sort of step out of supply chains, and we are very good at only thinking in our own supply chains and not thinking about like the wider business. But the more we can do about encouraging, yes, be brave, yes, let's go and have a look what's going on in other processors' farms as well, and encourage them to do the same to us, the more we start to really get a genuine change happening on industry. Again, but using data and that granular data at its heart, so we're confident about the sense of direction. So having learned and having sort of, and obviously we've got so much more to do, we have done a lot of measuring and a lot of farm data now, which is fantastic, but we are able then to start to sort of say, okay, well, what is our theoretical minimum? And also importantly, what does that mean for us corporately? Understandably, I've got people in the business going, well, very nice, Sophie, what's actually happening? Are you actually making a difference? Is all of this money that we are, and we have invested quite a lot of money as a business, is this actually making a difference? And so working with Hugh and the team at Map of Ag, we're able to sort of say, okay, so this is where we're going to look to sort of understand what our potential emissions trajectory could look like if we support and continue to support this with the right incentives in the right way. And then that sort of comes to stimulate some more granular action plans. So before we had that little, you wouldn't be able to see it, but red, amber, green model, which spat out some KPIs. We're trying to get much deeper into, well, what are the really 2 or 3 things that a farm might want to get after and really get behind to make a difference on their own farm that they choose to do with their vet and their agronomist and their advisors, as well as with Map of Ag, to make that difference. And how do we play our part to incentivise in the right way? And just a note on those incentives as well. Again, we've learned a lot with incentives. We did an incentive where we incentivized our dairy beef farmers to get to a certain weight, to basically finish by 18 months. It was counterintuitive, unfortunately. It just meant that we had lots of unintended, not always, but often some unintended consequences where the cattle be fed with a whole load of quite expensive feed products, which wasn't necessary, which had quite a high environmental footprint. So we have to be so mindful about what incentives we set to make sure they are looking at the whole picture and not just rewarding a potential one solution, which might create other intended consequences. So we think about these things very carefully. We do, however, have some really good case studies that's come from the work that we've done with Map of Ag. So one particular farmer, Tim Phipps, who's one of our farmers down in Northamptonshire, has been working with us for 4 years, and he's got a fantastic sort of story about how he's looked at his own emissions footprint through efficiency in his system. We've done sort of like, we've sponsored and delivered AI projects, through which is obviously still more novel than it should be in beef systems, but we have looked about how we can look at their finishing balls, what the sort of bit more sort of genetic selection would look like, and the look of sex semen through those AI projects. We're sort of starting to see a bit of a difference, and again his projected net emissions, so net including his sequestration work as well, are sort of like looking sort of really quite favourable now from where beef farms previously were. So it is starting to make a difference, but we are understanding that this is a very, very long journey, and it's about us continually listening to what's the right thing for farmers and accepting and being sort of respectful of that data. So in conclusion, because I appreciate that time is, I was probably, anyway, I won't bother. But net zero and sustainable farming is obviously a huge challenge. Setting the theoretical minimum does break it down. It sets a bit of that North Star, not only for us as a business, but also for the sectors that we deal with. We're doing this across beef, pork, lamb, eggs, potatoes, the key products that are coming to our manufacturing business, but also helps us to sensibly framework incentives, engage farmers and assess our progress step up, and also have the bravery to redefine as necessary. But partners are key, and actually I work for a chap called Andrew Thornbury. He's an absolutely inspiring guy, and he always says to me, who's on your team, Soph? How are you going to get there? You can't do this alone. Who's on your team? And it's absolutely essential, and I'm very sort of a privilege that we've got a really great team of experts that we work with. Okay, so thank you very much, and I think am I allowed to take questions, or am I running out of time? 2 questions, there you go, if anybody does have any. If not, I'll hand over.
You mentioned sequestration there.
Yes.
And how do you reward farmers? Is it worth their while to invest in sequestration to offset
Yeah, it's a really good question. So to be quite honest with you, at the moment we're still in the process of measuring and understanding what sequestration actually we've got things like the Woodland Carbon Code, which is, you know, obviously is set up and established, and we've also done some partnership working with Downforce, who are a really interesting satellite technology company who can look at the sort of overall farm footprint and go back 5 years, looking at what's happened in previous times. At the moment, our sort of like our way in for that has just been paying for that to happen and give the farmers more data. We haven't yet, as yet sort of started to reward, if you like, sequestration. What we have done, though, is spend and invest in time with farm advisors to help farmers understand the full range of SFI they can access. Not every farmer always finds that easy to get after. You know, sometimes there's lots of things out there, but you do have to be quite motivated to come and find them all. So we've also sort of got at it that way. So at this moment, we haven't sort of rewarded. We are also sort of sponsoring a PhD at Harper Adams looking into biodiversity metrics, understanding how that aligns to sequestration and understanding whether biodiversity and therefore sort of nature improvement, but, you know, what are the right incentives to sponsor. So we've tried to make it about practical, finding out data and measuring and giving advice. And then, yeah, we haven't done the incentives quite yet. Yeah, at the back.
You mentioned Scope 3 emissions as one of your primary drivers to try and reduce your footprint. Of the animal feed that your farmers are feeding, what percentage of the Scope 3 emissions are driven by that animal feed?
It depends on the sector, really. If we look across onto eggs or pigs, you know, then obviously it's a huge portion. For beef, it's a relatively small portion of animal feed. Most of the beef is obviously coming from, you know, homegrown, if you like, and literal grass and forage systems. However, as Hugh describes, you know, what we're doing at that point is actually asking the farmers, you know, what for their quantities, and then actually Hugh's got a map of ag, and we don't see all this data in its granularity. Have got that relationship with feed advisors to understand what it is that's what's the footprint of that particular feed. We think it's important for us to not to see every little tiny, you know, element of data that's going into that. Some amount of, you know, farmers want to feel that they've got a safe space to have those conversations with Map of Ag. We more see a collected after point. So it is counted, but, you know, we and to you, basically, because we've got Hugh, to a granular detail, but it's based on what the farmers are telling us they use and the evidence that we've got from those invoices, if that helps. Yeah. Sorry, I think there was a question here. Beg your pardon. I'm a rubbish at chairing, aren't I? Just whoever hand I can see. I think. Did you have a question?
I think it was half answered.
Oh, okay.
I suppose there's two questions. One, how do you get the data from farmers?
Yeah.
Two, if it requires some farmer input, how do you keep farmers motivated to give you the data?
Yeah, sure. So and then that's the third question. Sorry, I've been not very well behaved here. So we get the data by trying to make it just read from automatic systems like BCMS or like our kill data, you know, wherever possible. Obviously, that doesn't then work if you go to pigs, or, you know, so we've had to look at other sort of systems too. But then also to the incentives, we've also given farmers £100 Morrison's voucher for completing the carbon footprint and the actual time. You know, actually, you'd be surprised how motivating that was. So they quite liked that as opposed to something adding into their farm check. So it's something a bit different. So we've tried to sort of think creatively.
I'm just going to quickly add to that. How do you get the data? It's permission specifically for the purpose of that emissions assessment. So it's all done via an ISO accredited route, so the data is very securely accessed. I think if that was part of the question, it's just important pointing out that it's permission for a very specific reason, and those permissions are set up and the farmer signs up to them specifically.
Great. Okay, I better sit down, otherwise one Karen will glare at me. Also, we won't get to the debate. So, right, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Quite a tough act to follow there, Sophie. Brilliant. Okay. Hi. Okay. So I'm Ali Hesko. So I'm ADM's Climate Smart Ag Country Coordinator, which is a bit of a mouthful, but basically I run all of our regenerations programs for the UK. I work as part of an EMEA team, but also work as a part of a global team too. A little bit about me. Previously, worked for ADM for 2 years. Previously worked in National Farmers Union on the policy and lobbying side. And then prior to that was fresh produce. So a little bit of a different background to Sophie there. But Map of Ag have invited me here today to talk to you about some of the work that we've been doing on carbon footprint, but also wider to that, we work with them on our regenerations programme, which is specifically about regenerative agriculture. So I'm quite excited to talk to you about that as well. Okay, so for those of you who don't know us, ADM is a global agricultural supply chain manager and processor. We operate globally as an origination business and across the value chain with a network of mills, crushers and other processing facilities. We've also got various different other branches of the business as well, like human nutrition and animal nutrition sides. But at ADM, I really like Sophie's point earlier around holistic approaches, and that's what we're about. We want to take a holistic approach. We know that carbon footprint is incredibly important to us and our customers as well, but we know that there are wider benefits to adopting regenerative agriculture and wider environmental concerns for our customers as well. So we're not just capturing carbon footprints, but we capture a wider range of impact areas through our regenerations programs, which are delivered across the world. And for us, we see regenerative agriculture as, firstly, an approach to future-proofing ADM's supply chains, securing a sustainable supply chain that ensures resilience, sustainability, adaptability in the face of climate change. So incredibly important to us on our future operations, not just now, but for the future as well. We also see it as a way to minimise our impact on not just the climate, but also regenerate our environment. I know it's a bit of a buzzword, but we know that there is imperative to make sure that we leave the climate in a better state than we found it. And regenerative agriculture, specifically on the carbon footprint side, actually combined with our other decarbonisation efforts across the ADM business group, actually is not just helping support our customers' Scope 3 sustainability wider commitments, but also supporting our commitments as too. And actually ADM has a vast array of internal Strive 35 commitments that we've made within our business to be able to achieve by 2035. And that covers GHG emissions, but also some of our water and waste use and energy use as well. And already we've seen a positive impact by our regenerative agriculture programs been implemented in terms of reduction in our Scope 3 emissions footprint. And actually, in the US, from our regenerations program, we reduced our footprint by 310,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. So we're already seeing impacts on our supply chain and our footprints from regenerations. We also know that our customer demand is more and more focused on sustainably produced products, and our programs are designed to help deliver this on the farm to the farm gate level. And we know that it's imperative for our customers that we have these opportunities to meet evolving and growing commercial requirements and ambitions around this space, and actually to secure our working relationships to the future. Our customers need to know that we're looking to the future and that we're working to adapt and to minimise our environmental impact. But also it opens various different doors as well to new opportunities in a changing world. And since our first regenerations program in the US in 2022, we've actually grown dramatically. So actually now in 2023, we announced that we'd enrolled around 2.8 million acres within our regenerative agriculture programs globally. So we've actually extended our ambition now for our global supply chains, not just for 4 million acres to be enrolled in regenerative agriculture programs globally, but now 5 million acres. So we're really trying to be ambitious here because we know that ADM works at scale, so our impact could be at scale. So how do we work with farmers on the ground in the UK? So this is where we work with MapAvAg, and we've been working with MapAvAg for a few years now. We launched our regenerations program back in September 2023, capturing part of our oilseed rape and milling wheat supply chains, and it's designed to support producers across our supply chains to implement regenerative agricultural actions on the ground that we know help importantly improve carbon footprints, soil health, on-farm biodiversity, and importantly supply chain resilience too. And ADM enrolls our growers across our supply sheds, providing financial incentives, importantly, because we know there is a cost to this to the farmer, technical support as well across the growing year. And at the end of the growing year, we work with MapAvAg to collect the data from our farmers, and we collate it into a report for our customers so that they can understand the impact that supporting this program is having on their supply chain commitments, but also reporting that data back to the farmers on the ground to empower them with the right data they need to help make improvements. Oh, and also we also provide technical support as well. So we work with regenerative agriculture specialists, Ceres Rural, on the ground. Oh, sorry, not actually moved it forwards, have we? It would help. Okay, so halfway through, but so we onboard growers, we work with Ceres Rural as well, and they provide technical support, one-to-one technical advice to our growers to help them with not just adopting some of these actions that we support, but adapting them to changing climates and changing challenges across the growing year. So I will move the slides on now. So I'll bring in Caroline in a minute, but actually remote reliable data we know is a non-negotiable for our customers. It really will help them properly understand their true carbon footprint and a range of other environmental footprints. But we also know to be cost effective and scalable, actually our work with customers needs to be remote so that actually we can provide data on a cost effective basis. So our program was actually designed with Map of Ag, and is designed to remotely collect the information from the farmers, but importantly implementing various different processes which we know will help us have robust data, such as validation processes to ensure reporting, reliable reporting of a range of KPIs, and also verification processes to give our customers confidence that what we say is happening on the ground actually is. So we work with a range of cutting-edge partners as well, and they've been brought through with Map of Ag. But it's been great to try something new, try a different way of working so that we can bring reliable remote data on a cost-effective way. Do you want to come in a little bit there? Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Ali. I guess Map of Ag, what we've help to pull together is a verification solution that can help ADM assess the extent to which the farmers are adopting the regenerations program. So the solution aims to be robust but as well as scalable and at the same time reducing the burden on farmers. We pull together connections with existing farm data sources as well as Ali mentioned, working with a satellite partner, a remote sensing partner who specifically collects satellite data to help us verify the practices, as well as connecting to industry greenhouse gas models, as well as working with the soil organic carbon specialist model as well.
Okay, sorry, I know I'm running out of time, but obviously today's talk is about carbon footprint, so I will focus actually on what I'm asked to talk about. And actually, carbon footprint is just one of the focuses of regenerative agriculture programs, but it is a very important one for our regenerations program because we know it is so important for our customers. And Hugh set the scene before around why it's important to industry and across the supply chain, but actually also what we're seeing now is that actually if businesses across the value chain don't start to make a move and to take action on these sorts of commitments, then actually, they start to lose relevance. ADM would start to lose relevance within the market if we didn't take action on sustainability. So we actually know it's really good for our business as well as our supply chain resilience and continue to work in a changing world. So, obviously, we know it's important to have a carbon footprint impact, don't we? You don't need to read all of the bits on it's just an indication. We know it's important that actually ADM's regeneration programs impact carbon footprint, but we also need to be able to highlight and quantify these benefits to not just ADM internally, but also our customers who might be supporting our programs around what sort of impact we can have on carbon footprints. And it's not an easy task because obviously, although we've been talking about carbon footprints for a while, actually there is still a lack of actual on-the-ground activity data, a lack of an industry blueprint for these sorts of programs, particularly regenerative agriculture programs, also the volatility of the UK weather, we all know, but also the changing climate and the uncertainty around where we're going to go with that. So over the past few years, actually, we've been working with Map of Ag on a range of projects to better quantify our footprints. And our regenerations program is a culmination of all our work with MAPAVAG, taking all the learnings and utilising various different results from projects that we've run with them, such as the Sustainable Wheat Programme, to better understand the footprints of the crops that we produce. And in addition to this, actually working with MAPAVAG, we produced our first pathways study back in summer 2024, which was using the data available to us to quantify what our programme can achieve now and also opportunities for further footprint reductions for the future. And this was our first step, really, to quantifying a practical minimum, as Hugh mentioned at the start. We've used various different previous project data, data sets from our first years of the programme as well, to model its potential against a range of different scenarios and situations. And it takes a lot of techie people like Caroline and Hugh to be able to do this. Because we've had to take into account weather, climate change scenarios and other variable factors. And actually we worked with them to model the outputs of our next steps for the programme as well. You know, what do we want to implement now and what do we want to implement in 5 years' time? And how might that impact not just carbon emissions, but also soil carbon sequestration as well, and quantifying the possible range of reductions of footprints that can be achieved, which again is no easy task. However, we know that our work with MAPAVAG has really helped quantify our footprint potential within our programme, not just within our CROP25 programme and the current programmes that we're running, but also for the future as well, and helps our customers have faith and understand what our programmes are trying to achieve. But we also know that industry, science and technology will continue to evolve alongside government requirements. So actually, we believe that this work needs to be iterative. Actually, this is just the first step. You know, we've taken the first step to do this pathway study back in summer 2024 so that we can continue to move with the data sets that we have, with the various different industry guidelines, and start to make more headway on achieving a practical minimum and understanding what we can do to strengthen our programmes to reach our full potential. So in 2025, we will be rerunning this study with the latest data sets that we'll get from this year's outputs and reports, and use the latest industry insight and latest industry guidance to be able to better forge our path towards a practical and economically viable minimum, because we know that's super important to not just us, but also our farmers and the future of our supply chains. But I know carbon footprint, it is a massive focus for all of us. It's a massive focus across different types of businesses. But we also know that there are holistic benefits to regenerative agriculture programmes across our supply chain. And it's not just around soil health, but also for us, supply chain resilience and business resilience for not just our business, but the growers that we work with. And actually we believe, sorry, I've done this again. Okay. But yes, so we believe there are holistic benefits to the power of the story of RegenAg and the regenerative agriculture programs that we run. And actually, as an industry, we need to harness the power of the story of RegenAg better, connecting our customers to our end consumers, to the farmers who produce their food on the ground, and highlighting the imperative of supporting these sorts of programs and this sort of work to not just protect farm resilience and supply chain production, but also to ensure that we have food produced for the future, really. So if I move forward with that, actually, we've done a lot of work to be able to highlight the importance and highlight the story of regenerative agriculture to our customers, our end consumers. So I just wanted to play you a quick video around how we're trying to better communicate this.
Oh, over the moon with it. We've been growing wheat now and oats for over 10 years for ADM. I'm really pleased to see their regeneration programme come alive, because it's everything what we're about. And if we didn't do something, there'd be nothing there for the next generation. It's providing the opportunity for farmers to grow their wheats and their crops for ADM in a sustainable way. We are seeing it in how the soil works, the water retentiveness of the soils. It's a journey, but it mustn't end.
My God, they are absolutely massive.
The soil is the life and soul of everything a farmer does, through good rotations, always putting something back. Not just for the crop ahead, but the things what live in the soil.
I just cannot believe how many bees we've got.
Don't be frightened to ask questions. Don't be frightened to look over the hedge. Speak to ADM. Speak to farmers who are already doing this, because it's a lot easier than what most farmers think it can be.
Brilliant. I'm just really pleased that video actually worked. Are there any questions? I'm allowed two? Oh, more. Yeah, are there any questions? Oh, you've just all been astonished by the video. Yes, sorry, at the back.
I'll ask a question of the relevant actually yourself and Sophie. Do you think there's lots of people calculating carbon, doing metrics around sustainability? Do you think we need to start and coordinate this? Because we need a metric that we can all adhere to. Because in the Waitrose scenario, you know, there's a very interesting slide put up with what customers say. I can see it from the back, but I wonder was there a question on that, would customers pay? Because I think actually giving £100 voucher to farmers is fantastic, don't get me wrong, to give data, but ultimately the question has to be asked to the consumer with an acceptance of climate change and global warming. Do you want to pay more for this food that's produced with a lower carbon footprint, or do you not want to do that? But I think that's interesting. And the reality is, if one farmer does this and this farmer over there in hedgerow doesn't do it, but they both get paid the same for their beef or their grain, then you've got a fundamental problem, because what's the incentive?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second half of the question there first. So we do provide financial incentives for our growers. We know importantly that there is a cost to implementing these actions, there is a cost to their time, there is a cost to the resource that they put into it. And actually, you know, we do recognise that data is a sensitive topic across the industry. And actually, we know that, you know, you wouldn't get up in the morning and provide data or provide your time and energy to something if you weren't getting a reward out of it. So why should they? So we do provide technical financial support as well, because we do think it's important. When it comes to alignment across the industry, I completely agree. You know, there needs to be more alignment across the value chain and also across various different sectors of the industry to make sure that we're recording data in the same way and we're reducing the administrative burden on farmers. But that's also a benefit of working with Map of Ag, because they do have APIs into various farming systems and, for example, Muddy Boots or Gatekeeper. And although not every farmer utilises those, it's a more streamlined way to get that data. It's easier for them, and it means that we know it's more accurate because there's less chance of someone putting an extra zero in on the end. And we do have those validation and verification processes in place that we know help check that data before it comes to the final report, but actually we want to try and make it as easy a process for us as well as for them as well. So we do think there is a lot to be done there, and there is more work across the industry to be done to align on boundaries and reporting as well, and to work better so that farmers can stack incentives more. And I think, you know, 2025 will definitely be a year of working on that, and it's something that ADM has been working with and feeding into discussion on. Okay.
So I'm conscious we have run over time, so people are
People have more questions they want to ask of sort of the panel, if you like. If there's any questions, and we'll nip up for five minutes. If you've got 5 minutes to hang on, we'll allow people to ask questions.
Can I ask one, which I think might be slightly implied in one of the earlier questions?
Do you relieve me of the clicker?
I think that, I can't remember exact figure, but feed fuel and fertiliser
Yeah.
represents a high percentage of the farm's emissions footprint. And yet, if you analyse it from a farmer's perspective, that is actually their Scope 3 emissions, effectively. And so it feels like there's a lot of pressure on farms that's coming from the retail end to say we want to help the retailer in terms of lowering the emissions, because the retailer needs 97% of your emissions and Scope 3. But the farmer's not really in the same sort of position to require that of their suppliers. So what can the businesses like ADM and Morrison's actually do to support farmers in helping in that area? But given that actually a farmer's own footprint is, they've got their own Scope 3s to deal with.
Yeah, no, that's right. So obviously that had a retailer side on it, so I'll take that one first, if you like one, Julian. So just quickly, because I appreciate that those who are going to the debate might want to go to the debate. So just sort of say that yes, you're quite right, but however, there is still a lot within the farmer's own footprint. The farm's Scope 3 emissions are a lot smaller than our Scope 3 emissions, and there is so much more that a farmer can control themselves. So if you look at a beef farm, you're sort of talking about 80% of their sort of like emissions are about enteric fermentation and sort of essentially methane production. So, and actually that's largely more in the farm's own control through genetics and feed deficiencies. And obviously you're never going to get that to zero, but you are going to get to a theoretical minimum. However, we are also, it is part of our responsibility to act within sort of like wider industry groups to understand, how do you work with, sort of the feed supply chains. That's why things like EUDR and deforestation initiatives are really important when you're looking for soy footprints to reduce. And so, that's also part of our responsibility is to work within those bigger industry groups, as well as it is to, to work specifically with each one.
I mean, it's important to note that effectively emissions accumulate through the supply chain. So as a farm, you're purchasing product which is ultimately facilitating the production system that you have, and then those emissions follow through the supply chain. So the work that we're doing with Morrison's is not just attacking what is happening on the farm, but also what their procurement policy was. As I mentioned earlier, it's like what we're doing in order to procure low emissions feed and fat. It's a big factor. Any other sort of follow-up questions that anybody wants to ask before we close and let people go off to the debate? I would just like to say a massive thank you to Sophie and Ali before people do depart, and if you wouldn't mind just joining me in a quick round of applause. That'd be great.